Mayor Pete released an ad going after the idea of free college, and so by extension, he's going after Bernie here. This is special. He's really doing what I call the full cloud boot jar, or the full Delaney here, which is running a campaign and never talking about what you're for, only talking about what you're against. Or actually, scratch that. I should rephrase that. Only talking about, or primarily and predominantly talking about the things that you're against and not what you're for. So without further ado, take a look.
I believe we should move to make college affordable for everybody. There are some voices saying, well, that doesn't count unless you go even further, unless it's free even for the kids of millionaires. But I only want to make promises that we can keep. Look, what I'm proposing is plenty bold. I mean, these are big ideas. We can gather the majority to drive those big ideas through without turning off half the country before we even get into office. And that, I think, is the best governing strategy, as well as what it's going to take in order to win. And Lord knows we got to win. I'm Pete Buttigieg, and I approve this message.
I wonder why it is that Mayor Pete was the number one recipient of billionaire money so far. And actually, that fact may have just changed recently, but according to an article from about 3 months ago, he was leading the pack in terms of how many billionaire contributors he had. I can't figure it out. Because they actually think he's somewhat viable, unlike Delaney, unlike Cloud Boujar, and they're trying to help him out as much as possible because he makes arguments like this. So let's run through the many reasons why this is a really, really terrible stance he's taking. First of all, the children of rich people are much more likely to go to private universities than public universities. So that's an important point. Whenever he makes the argument that he just made, there's, the sense people get from it, you could say rightly or wrongly, it doesn't really matter, but the sense people get from it is, oh, if we have free college, we're helping out millionaires and billionaires and their families and their kids, and I don't want to do that because they could take care of themselves. So it's a very misleading point just solely based on that fact, solely based on the fact that the kids of wealthy families are more likely to go to private universities than public universities. The next point is, he's not even correct. Like, let's say for a second, it was the case that the kids of wealthy families would go to the free public universities. Their taxes would go up to pay for this proposal anyway. So even if they go to these free public universities, they'd still be net payers into the system because the tax rate that they would pay would mean they're paying in more than they're receiving from it. So again, that's on that point, he's just flat wrong. Not even like, oh, maybe if he twists it, he has an argument. No, he's just wrong on that front. And then the point that I can't get out of my mind, the first thing that came to my mind when I heard Mayor Pete and others go after the idea of free college is, okay, well, why don't you just be consistent in your argument and say, why doesn't this same argument apply from K to 12? Why aren't you out there arguing against free K to 12? And I'm sure the answer is because we already have it. Like, that's, I'm sure, what they would say. But if you actually believed in the point you're making, then be objective and apply it across the board and say, yeah, we shouldn't have free K to 12. It shouldn't be like that because you're taking away choice and you're helping the kids of wealthy families. Be consistent. Take that position. See, it's this faux progressivism. There was an article that was written, I think it was in the Washington Post, but I could be wrong about that, where they tried to argue that Mayor Pete's means-tested approach on college is actually more progressive than Bernie Sanders' position. Utterly absurd. Utterly absurd. And also, when you get into this details, apparently he said, or somebody in his staff said, oh, if you make $100,000 or more, you wouldn't get free college in his ideal scenario. To which AOC pointed out, correctly, well, hold on now, $100,000, so you can have a working mom and dad, each making 50 grand, they're not wealthy. It's especially depending on what district they live in. They're not wealthy, and they're not going to qualify for free college. And even if you have a single breadwinner in the family and they make $100,000, in some districts, even though that's a good amount of money, in some districts it's not as much as people might think. So to include them in the same category as like Jeff Bezos and as, billionaires and multimillionaires, that's ridiculous. But this is what his plan does. It's a terrible, terrible plan. And then his other point is, well, listen, you're more likely to get my idea through. Based on what? Citation needed, bro. That's actually not true at all. You're not more likely to get a means-tested, plan through. In fact, Republican lawmakers are going to oppose anything that the left tries to do or that Democrats try to do. And actually, when you talk about free college, that polls, depending on what poll you look at, it polls at around 60% favorability. So your terrible means-tested approach polls lower, and the Republicans in the Senate and in Congress are going to block it anyway. Our idea, sure, the Republicans in the Senate and the Republicans in Congress are going to want to block free college, no doubt about that. But at least we have massive public support, which means actually if we harness the will of the people and we're really aggressive and we do a full court press and a strong campaign in favor of free college, they'll feel a lot more political pressure in that scenario. Why? Because we're trying to drive home a policy proposal that has about a 60% approval rating, where you're trying to drive something home that's probably underwater, under 50%. So I think it's the exact opposite. I think you're much more likely to get through the more bold proposal, just because of the public support for the bold proposal, which is free college. And then the final point is, and many people have pointed this out in regards to these kinds of programs, guys, universal programs are more likely to be politically durable. And there's a very simple reason for that. So let's assume for a second you get this plan in place. It's going to be politically durable because it is decidedly not welfare. It's something that everybody experiences the benefits of. So it's much less likely to ever get put on the chopping block and be cut. That's why, to this day, Republicans have a hard time cutting Medicare and Social Security. So they have a hard time doing it because they're more broad programs. Whereas if you have something like welfare, for example, that was the first thing on the chopping block. They did welfare reform. It was a Democratic president in the 1990s that did welfare reform, because it's easy to demonize those programs when it's only a smaller segment of the population that's benefiting from them. And universal programs poll higher, have more support, and then when they're in place, it's much harder to cut them. Look at the NHS in the UK. Conservatives are much less likely to go after it. And when they do go after it, they have to be weaselly about it and do it in underhanded, sly ways, because they know it's basically political suicide if they're honest and upfront about what they want to do with the NHS. Because even conservative voters in the UK generally like the NHS. So these programs are overwhelmingly popular and therefore harder to cut once they're in place. Whereas a means-tested approach could be dismissed as welfare, and they're easier to cut because they're not as popular. So, I mean, there's the plethora of reasons why Mayor Pete's approach to this is dead wrong. But I do think it's quite telling that he's gone full cloud boot jar, full Delaney. I mean, guys, you have to remember, Mayor Pete at the beginning of this race, he tried to pretend like he was more in the Bernie Sanders lane. I remember him arguing for Medicare for All on MSNBC. And saying, hey, we need to shift the conversation. We need to change the Overton window. The real left-wing position is an NHS-style proposal, so the compromise would be like a French-style system, which is still, public funding. The public is the single insurer. So that used to be his position. He used to talk favorably about a lot of left-wing ideas, and then as soon as he realized, okay, that lane is closed because Bernie's dominating there, seamlessly shifted to the right. He used to have Twitter arguments with people where he said, no, I am in favor of Medicare for all. Then flipped as soon as he thought, oh, that's not the political lane where I can win. So Mayor Pete is such a fraud. Guys, he doesn't, and this is the main point, he doesn't really believe in anything. He'll change his mind to say the thing that he thinks he should say in order to raise more big donor money and get elected. Like, what philosophy are you repping? What philosophy are you repping? I could tell you the philosophy of various Democrats running, the ones who actually believe in something. I could tell you the main reason why Andrew Yang is running universal basic income. I could tell you the main reason why Tulsi is running end regime change wars. I could tell you the main reason why Bernie Sanders is running Medicare for all, end the corruption. I mean, it's obvious why the candidates who are actually half decent are running. Why are you running, Mayor Pete? Why are you running, Mayor Pete? Here's the answer. Mayor Pete. Narcissism. Self-aggrandizement. This policy proposal is horrendous, and I have zero interest in any Democrats who are running for office and they spend equal time or more time telling you what they're against instead of what they're for.